In a world shattered by war and chaos, a fragile little angel, her black wings broken and torn, swore she would grow strong enough to put an end to inequality and injustice. Time passed, and that angel became the dreaded conqueror, Lufa's Mafahal. A band of adventurers gathered to strike her down. Yet she revealed a power beyond comprehension, an unstoppable ability that could overwhelm even heroes of the highest rank. No matter how fierce their attacks, Lufa's always answered with something greater. Even so, she could not escape the clash unscathed. Their strength was simply too overwhelming. Still, throughout the entire battle, she gave the impression that everything was under her control. Then the unthinkable happened. One of the enemy warriors deliberately allowed himself to be wounded, unleashing a climax ability that caught Lufa's off guard. It opened just enough of an opening for the party's mage to cast a subspace seal, trapping the villainess at last. Though imprisoned, she laughed wickedly and taunted her captors, saying that if they had the skill to take her down, perhaps they might even stand a chance against Orm, the Demon King. Back in front of his computer, a boy scratched his head in defeat. He had lost the fight in Reincarnated Online, and Lufa's had fallen, but at least he could say she fought until the very end. Suddenly, on his screen, appeared Alovenus, the goddess of creation, the very deity who had shaped the world of Reincarnated. She asked if he would like to take on a new role within that world. To him, it felt monumental, a personal message from the developers. After all, his character, Lufa's Mafahal, had become as iconic as the Demon King himself. Naturally, the boy accepted. In an instant, he was pulled into Reincarnated Online, not as an avatar this time, but in flesh and blood. A group of warriors and adventurers, following their king, had just broken the seal of the black-winged conqueror, and they stared in awe at the figure that appeared before them. Touching his new body, the player froze as he realized the truth beneath his clothing was a rather generous chest. Somehow, he had been reborn as his own character. When he first created Lufa's, his reasoning had been simple. If I'm going to stare at this character for hours, she'd better be beautiful. That was his very first mission in the game. What he never expected was to become her himself, the terrifying yet stunning black-winged conqueror. Desperate for answers, the boy tried to ask a question, but the words that came out weren't questions, they were commands, fierce and absolute, carrying such force that the poor adventurers collapsed to the ground as though crushed by gravity itself. They could only obey. Realizing that his racial ability intimidation must have activated, Lufa's forced herself to rein it back. The moment she did, an elf among the group grew pale. He was convinced the conqueror had returned. Lufa's, her voice sharp and merciless, demanded the elf explain how he knew her. Terrified, he fainted on the spot, leaving the others to fill in the blanks. From their account, she learned the truth. She had been sealed for 200 years, and the Demon King still ruled Midgars. The adventurers had tried to use Reincarnated to summon a hero who could defeat him, but instead, they had revived Lufa's Mafahal. It finally dawned on the boy inside her. He was truly inside the game, and the Reincarnated spell, a central mechanic that had never once appeared, had been used at last. Amazing as it was, this wasn't the time to geek out. What mattered was figuring out what to do next. Seeing the fear in everyone's eyes, Lufa's decided the best course was to leave. She told them to forget she existed and to summon another hero in her place to face the Demon King. Revenge for her sealing was not her goal. That last battle had been enough for her. No, this would no longer be the story of Lufa's the Conqueror, but of a young woman whose hopes had been broken, one now searching for a new path. She would see what the world had become and what form it had taken. With that, Lufa's spread her wings and took to the skies, surprised to find she could still use them so freely. Soaring into the open air, the boy, now the conqueror herself, felt a rush of pure joy. He had been pulled into his favorite game, Reincarnated Online, inhabiting a character of his own creation, one so powerful it thrilled him to the core. One day, he would have to figure out how to return to his original world, but that could wait. Soon after, he stumbled upon a towering landmark he hadn't seen in ages, an iconic structure at the very heart of the game's lore. Reincarnated Online, set in the world of Midgars, was a medieval fantasy MMO whose crown jewel was its PvP system. Players swore allegiance to a nation, waged war against rival kingdoms, and fought to claim victory for their side. But there was another feature that made the game unique: the narrative system, which adapted players' choices and actions into an official storyline. Lufa's Mafahal was one of its greatest examples. She had climbed to the level cap and become the strongest character in existence. For the first time in the game's history, her creator had managed to unify all of Midgars under her rule. It was such a monumental feat that she was officially recognized in the lore, dubbed the Black-Winged Conqueror. and even granted semi-official status by the developers. But a world with only one supreme ruler was no fun. So the boys struck deals with other players, dividing them into two great armies, the Conqueror's Army, under Lufa's, and the Army of Light, under the Heroes. They ignored the official final boss entirely and staged the largest battle in the game's history. And, as everyone knows by now, that was when Lufa's was finally defeated, sealed away in subspace for centuries. Now, standing before the sky tower of Mafahel, her fortress Lufa's makes her way to the throne room. A wave of inexplicable nostalgia washes over her as she takes in the Great Hall. Though dusty and empty, it's still in good enough condition to be used. She sits upon the throne and remembers the friends she once had, the companions she gathered in this very tower to drink, laugh, and set out on missions to expand her domain. Then, a memory suddenly surfaces, catching the player by surprise. At that very moment, a young girl appears, stunned to find Lufa's seated on the throne. With a radiant smile and a burst of excitement, she approaches her leader, the woman she has patiently awaited for 200 long years. But Lufa's doesn't share her enthusiasm. In truth, she doesn't even remember who this girl is. Frustrated but undeterred, the girl introduces herself as Dina, the Conqueror's faithful advisor. Only then does the player recall placing an NPC in this tower when it was first created. Apparently, the generic backstory given to her had been enough for Dina to develop a will of her own. That, at least, explains why she had been waiting for so long. After all, Dina is no human player. To avoid making the situation more awkward, Lufa's apologizes for forgetting such a loyal servant and thanks Dina for safeguarding the tower in her absence. After Lufa's recounts the story of how she arrived there, Dina speculates that the ones responsible for freeing her master must have been from the western nation of Levitane, since they had been preparing a hero summoning ritual for quite some time. Curious, Lufa's asks what has happened since her departure. Dina explains that the despised heroes who once defeated her became known as the Seven Heroes, each founding their own nation. 2 centuries have passed, 4 of them are now dead, leaving only 3 races with longer lifespans. The Demon King still lives, as do the 12 celestial stars of conquest, the rare and powerful NPC beasts Lufa's herself had designed to serve her in war. Back then, she believed a ruler should always be surrounded by formidable subordinates, like 4 generals or something of the sort, so she created them. Dina knows the whereabouts of 6 of these creatures, and reveals that 2 have joined the Demon King to avenge Lufa's death. Though they fight in her name, their master disapproves of the path they've taken and vows to deliver them a harsh reprimand. In any case, the Conqueror's creator intends to see the world's current state with her own eyes, and confirm whether the 3 surviving heroes are players like him. For that, she must set out on a journey to reunite the 12 stars. Dina informs her that the nearest one, the Ram Ares, is in Svel, home to one of the 3 remaining heroes, Megrez. Ares is camped at the foot of the nearby volcano, still trying to break into Svel after all these years. Without hesitation, Lufa's decides they should head there at once, but Dina warns her not to rush out carelessly. Her master is too well known, she would be instantly recognized. Lufa's insists that after all this time, no one would remember her face. Yet Dina reminds her that long-lived races, such as elves, certainly do, and those black wings are far too distinctive to ignore. On top of that, the Conqueror's army is completely broke. If they truly plan to embark on this journey, they'll need money. So Dina suggests they go undercover in Svel, register with the Adventurers Guild, and take on small jobs at first to avoid drawing attention. And so, the pair sets out for Svel. Lufa's dons a cloak that conceals her entire body, wings tucked tightly beneath her garments. Still, as she notices the lingering stares of the townsfolk, she realizes she might be attracting a different kind of attention. Regardless, the 2 head for the guild, a tavern as well as a gathering place for adventurers. The moment she steps inside, Lufa's feels a rush of familiarity. Surrounded by shady, rough-looking types, she's struck by a strange sense of comfort. A nostalgic reminder of her days as an adventurer before founding her own nation. Standing before the quest board, Dina suggests they start small with a job paying 1/200 to find a dozen lost cats. But Lufa's points out that tracking animals by scent is a beast man's skill, making it far too difficult. So Dina finds another request: exterminating orcs, also known as porks. When slain, they have a 3% chance of dropping an item that increases maximum HP, a perfect chance to earn not only the 1,500 reward, but potentially rare loot as well. Without wasting time, the two travel to Isle Village. There, the elder pours out his worries the porks have been destroying homes, kidnapping women, and killing the village's young men. Dina reassures the people that the solution to all their problems is standing right before them. And that solution is none other than Lufa's Mafahal. After locating the pork nest, Dina shudders and remarks that even the goddess of creation must regret every day having made such a vile race. Lufa's responds that the goddess is merciful and loves all equally, but Dina insists that Alovinus is not quite so benevolent. Either way, she's eager to see her master wipe out these orcs once and for all. Lufa steps forward, spreading her vast black wings as she prepares for battle. First, she checks her status to confirm she truly is at the maximum level, and that everything is in perfect order to devastate these swine-like creatures. Of course, there's a difference between crushing enemies with a controller in hand and doing it in real life. The player feels a flicker of unease, but since they're already here, better to try than to back down. With that in mind, Lufa snaps her fingers to awaken alchemic creation. At once, dozens of magical swords rise from the earth and launch toward the enemy monsters, tearing through the guards at the entrance with sinister ease and brutal violence. Though she's the one slaughtering these creatures, the player feels absolutely nothing as the massacre unfolds. In the next instant, every orc rushes out from within the cave to face the intruder. There's an overwhelming number of warriors, and at the center of it all, their massive leader looms, promising to be a far greater threat. Dina's jaw drops in fear, while Lufa's remains perfectly composed. The moment the monsters charge at her, the conqueror realizes just how absurdly slow they really are. Every movement looks like the crawl of crippled slugs compared to her speed. With almost laughable ease, Mafahal rips the heads off the lesser orcs as if it were nothing more than a child's game. As blood rains down, the larger orcs' eyes quiver with dread, and the black-winged conqueror can't help but reflect on how fragile these creatures truly are. In a desperate frenzy, the orc chief hurls himself forward with all his weight, unleashing blow after blow. The ground shakes beneath his fury, the terrain collapsing into chaos. And yet, despite this storm of rage, Lufa's remains utterly untouched, pristine, unscathed. As flames rise, wrapping the monster in a fiery prison, the winged celestial reflects that the real difference isn't their fragility at all. It's that her strength and speed are so far beyond theirs. The orcs might as well be nothing. With that thought, Lufa gently presses her closed fist against the enemy leader's forehead. His skull bursts apart in an instant. Dina stares at the grotesque sight, her face frozen between terror and awe, while her master, having crushed the fight so easily, concludes that this could never be called a battle. No, it was a massacre. After finishing off the orcs, it was time to take a look at anything valuable they might have dropped. For example, the two were lucky enough to find an intact orc loin, an item that, when not damaged or spoiled, can increase the HP of whoever eats it. Usually, these kinds of monsters are always fighting and end up wounded, so finding a loin in perfect condition is quite rare. In fact, the chance is around 3%. Upon learning this, Lufa's planned to defeat orcs without injuring the loin, while Dina promised to cook the item later for her master to eat. To make things easier, she teleported all the corpses to the tower, so she could later see which ones might be useful in some way. Lufa was impressed that her servant possessed so many powers and so much knowledge about everything. But aside from that, the two decided to head to the women from the village who had been kidnapped by the orcs. When they arrived and freed the prisoners, Dina noticed, fortunately, that all of them were fine. What she couldn't understand, however, was how none of them had been violated, since orcs are grotesque and terrifying creatures. To her surprise, Lufa explained that they were actually kinder than they seemed, at least when it came to women. They cared about maintaining a certain respect to earn women's affection. Still, it was clear that the women who had been kidnapped would carry the trauma of the experience, which was already a serious form of violence. Because of that, the Celestial declared that it was impossible for orcs and humans to live in peace. She then summoned Hrungnir's gigantic right fist and crushed the orcs' hideout so that no one would survive. Once that was done, and after regaining her composure from witnessing that grim spectacle, Dina asked if her master wanted her to erase the prisoners' memories, so they wouldn't have to suffer from the trauma of being kidnapped. Lufa then asked if there was any way to reverse such a treatment, and upon learning that there was a small possibility, the Celestial decided to leave things as they were, at least for now. Thus, aboard a giant golem, the two took the women back to the village they had come from. On the way, Lufas admitted she didn't understand why people didn't take jobs related to killing orcs, since it was the easiest thing in the world and, besides, those monsters could drop good loot, like the loin they had found. Dina explained that things had changed a lot over the past 200 years. Nowadays, people were much weaker than they used to be back when the feared Lufas Mafahel ruled. For instance, among the warriors of that kingdom, Levatine, the one the Celestial had met after being freed from her seal, was the strongest of them, and yet only level 120, even though their nation was called the Kingdom of Swords. Lufas was astonished by that, since surpassing level 100 in her time had been relatively simple. According to Dina, society had changed its mindset. After all, you only live once. To reach an absurdly high level, people would have to train day after day, until the end of their lives, doing nothing but train, just to maybe reach that point. Because of that, people preferred to live more normal lives. In that sense, Lufas could understand why people thought that way after all. This was no longer a game. With that in mind, the player lifted his head toward the sky and reflected on what his servant had said, "You only live once." Hours later, when they arrived at the village, joy filled the place, as the women were finally safe and back home. For that reason, of course, all the villagers were extremely grateful for the heroine's service, and she received the 1,500 L that had been promised. As if that weren't enough, Lufas even decided to leave the golem behind to protect the village in case of another attack. And the elder of that land no longer knew how to thank her for everything she had done. He even called the Celestial a messenger of God. Lufas smiled but said nothing, for in truth, she was practically the opposite of that. Finally, she and her companion prepared to leave. However, one of the villagers asked for the heroine's name, since she couldn't reveal her real one. Lufas grew uneasy for a moment until Dina stepped forward and replied that her master's name was Esfalu, obviously a random rearrangement of the letters in the Celestial's name. Because of that, once the two were out of sight, Lufas stomped on the girl's foot. It had been way too ridiculous, not to mention dangerous, since such a pathetic name sounded suspiciously made up. Nevertheless, unshaken as always, Dina tanked the damage from the sandal strike to her big toe and kept walking firmly, confident that she had done the best she could under pressure. The next day, the two took a carriage toward their next destination. With the money they had earned from the job, they could now eat and sleep well and still had a good amount saved up. Plus, Lufas had eaten the orc loin and increased her vitality. Without a doubt, as both of them agreed, it was a great start to their journey. Thus, Svel awaited them. Now that they had some money saved, their next step was to find Ares, the ram, one of the 12 celestial stars of conquest who had been attacking Svel relentlessly. Lufas also wanted to find out if there were other players like her in this world, imagining that they might be the 3 surviving members of the 7 heroes who had once defeated her. The first one to look for was Megrez, the ruler of the country they were heading to. After a long trip in their carriage, the two passed through a beautiful flower field that emitted bright particles of some mysterious element. Lufas asked what it was, and her companion explained that it was mana. This nation was rich in it, and the fact that this field pulsed with mana was a sign that they were getting close to their destination. Looking out the carriage window, Dina was amazed by the sight of the beautiful city of water, the nation founded by Megrez. At the end of the trip, already at the entrance gate, the duo is stopped by the guards, since a visa is required to enter the country. Lufas gets furious for having no idea that this was necessary. However, pulling a rabbit out of her hat, Dina shows a visa to the guard, where the registered names are hers and the Celestial's false one, Sfalu. In the document, it is written that the two are independent merchants with no affiliation to any nation. The guard responsible for verifying the document's authenticity remarks that it's quite common for people to forge visas to enter Svel, but that he would never fall for such a trick. Claiming that the document is genuine, he allows the women to pass, even though Lufas is certain that the thing is fake. Once inside, the cheerful assistant decides to give a small lecture about the country they are in. The magical nation of Svel was founded by one of the 7 heroes, an elf known as the wise King Megrez. Svel is famous for being extremely rich in mana, and for using that abundance to fund magical schools and the pursuit of knowledge. Because of that, people who dream of becoming mages or scholars come from all over the world to this city. Lufas asks if the glow of the lake also comes from mana, and her servant confirms that it does. In fact, because of that, she asks whether her mistress isn't bothered by all this mana everywhere, since celestial beings usually don't get along well with such a large presence of that element. About that, Lufas says she can't speak for the others, but for some reason, she feels perfectly fine. For that reason, she feels comfortable enough to go meet Megrez and ask a few questions. Dina becomes worried that her mistress might want to invade the castle. But Lufas assures her she doesn't intend to cause any trouble, especially because this country has already been constantly threatened by Ares. In truth, the Celestial wants to settle this peacefully, and for that, she needs to visit the city's library to find in the history books what has happened in this world over the last 200 years. Lufas asks a man if he knows where the library is, and he replies that they are all located in the eastern area, introducing himself as Gantz, a mercenary who guards the city's coast. The man promises to take the women there. Dina says her name and introduces the suspicious person beside her, with her face covered, as follow. Because of that slip-up, Dina gets her foot stepped on again. Gantz notes that the woman is wearing rather peculiar clothing, but assumes she must have her reasons, so he leaves the matter alone to the luck of the two foreigners. As they walk to their destination, Dina comments on how lively and cozy the city feels, which the mercenary fully agrees with, though he laments that, unfortunately, the ram Ares has been attacking from time to time, causing visitors and newcomers to avoid Svel. Even so, he assures them that this place will stand strong, since the entire lake surrounding the country is actually a water golem created through alchemy by King Megrez. Lufas analyzes the golem's stats and discovers that it is a guardian deity named Levia, with an absurd HP of 180,000 points. Finally, Gantz takes the two to a monorail and says that, once they board, they will arrive at the eastern area where the libraries are located. Lufas is impressed by how modern the place is, and after saying goodbye to the mercenary, she becomes curious to check the stats of that kind and helpful man. He turns out to be a normal human, level 82, but considering that people have become weaker these days, he's actually strong compared to most. Before boarding the carriage, the Celestial reflects that there were no monorails in the game and that this thing is probably powered by magic or something similar. At the library, Lufas looks for a section with more recent history books, since so far everything she's found only talks about things she already knew from the game's lore. Upon reaching a certain shelf, she notices several books telling her own story. Lufas Asahi, usually portraying her as a controversial, if not evil, figure in some cases. On the other hand, she is also seen as an intriguing and, to some extent, admired personality. Not only that, but she can't understand how Megrez allows people to write so many books questioning the 7 heroes themselves, since many texts there even treat those heroes as possible threats. Dina explains that Megrez is not a tyrannical ruler, so it's not as if the people who write certain things end up on the gallows. Speaking of that, Dina assures her that even Mafahal is not as badly regarded as she thinks, because even though there are many books that describe Lufas as an evil entity, Dina believes that the fear people feel tends to fade over time. Today, many believe that humanity wouldn't need to fear the demons if Mafahal were the world's ruler again, especially because the Celestial was never a tyrant. Speaking of that, after choosing one of the books that talked about her, Lufas Mafahal is described as a celestial who suddenly appeared 200 years ago and unified the entire world in the blink of an eye. The reason why she wanted to conquer the world remains unknown. But interestingly, she never imposed a dictatorship on her subjects. On the contrary, Mafahal expelled tyrants, purged the people's enemies, and saved the nations of the world. Even so, part of humanity turned against the ruler and demanded independence. The division among humans strengthened the demons, who had once feared the strong unity of their enemies under the leadership of the black-winged conqueror. However, with countries becoming independent from one another, the creatures of darkness gained power and inflicted a series of devastating defeats on their opponents. Today, humanity is forced to live in just a few areas that are still suitable for their existence, and the age of men is on the verge of ending forever. Upon reading that, Lufas nearly falls into despair, because even though she knew the Demon King was still alive, she hadn't imagined things were this bad. Out of nowhere, she's thrown into this world that used to be a game, and when it turns real, everything is going downhill. Now she understands why such a small domain like Svel is called a country. It's because humanity itself is hanging by a thread. After the investigation, Lufas plans to leave the city and head to Ares' castle. However, an earthquake prevents her from doing so. A devastation without precedent begins in the city from north to south. The intense vibration could be felt, seriously damaging several houses and buildings and putting people's lives at risk. Immediately after the tremors stop, the city's sound system orders all mercenaries to go at once to the nation's border. Lufas knows that Ares possesses an earthquake ability, and considering that this city usually doesn't suffer from such calamities, she is certain that the ram is the cause of this tragedy. Just like Megriz and Lufa's, Dina also knows that Ares is coming after all. An intense fluctuation of mana is coming from a direction clearly affected by him. To reach that place quickly, Lufa's uses her alchemy ability to create a bird using the city's broken stones so she can travel through the skies. Dina nearly loses it out of fear, but her master lets the poor girl hold on to her so she won't be scared. On the way, the black-winged Overlord can't understand how Ares could be acting this way, since he is a rainbow ram, a being that hates conflict and prefers peace. For him to be invading Svel repeatedly, it might be because Lufa's was defeated by the 7 heroes, and this is his way of seeking revenge. Speaking of the ram, the celestial being is suddenly struck by a vision in her mind, a memory of the animal as a young lamb. Meanwhile, marching towards Svel, a horde of monsters is being led by a creature consumed by hatred. In the next moment, we go back to an old memory from Ares' life, when he was walking through a forest, sad and lonely, until he was found by Lufa's Mafahal. Lufa's was impressed to find such a rare species. Since a rainbow ram is born only once every 500 years, the Black Wing recognized the young one's struggle, imagining that he must have spent his life running from monsters and humans to survive, as he was a legendary creature with wool worth more than gold, and because of that, a very desired target. At the same time, the Celestial didn't feel pity for the creature. On the contrary, she criticized him for not stopping his crying for even a minute, instead of lifting his head and fighting back. Annoyed by that person's hostility, the ram decided to bite her arm. But instead of punishing him, she encouraged it, for that was the reaction she wanted to see. Then, Lufa's invited the little animal to join her journey, since she was also powerless and needed strength to dye the world with the colors of her domination. Impressed by the beauty of those darkened wings, the ram saw Mafahel look up to the starry sky that late afternoon and choose his name Ares. Back in the present, Svel's forces hurry to protect the city. Gantz stands beside his companion Johnny, defending the territory before the arrival of the main force. The army of Svel is considerable in number, but Ares' horde is much larger. That means they will have trouble holding the line until help actually arrives. During the reign of Mafahel, one of the laws established was that before invading any territory, the invader must declare war first. In this case, the earthquake caused by Ares was a clear sign that he would attack with all his strength this time. At that moment, Svel's commander is informed that the forces are ready, so the officer steps forward to give orders to the units. First, he positions his mages at the front and orders them to cast spells to reduce the enemy's numbers. After that, it's the archers' turn. Once ready, they release their arrows into the enemy lines and bring down a considerable number of monsters. From that moment on, as the opposing army approaches, the commander orders his infantry to advance. With his brutal strength, Gantz leads the front, wielding a heavy war axe as if it were a knife. The lightness of his movements, combined with an unshakable firmness, allowed him to slice through enemy creatures with an ease that bordered on the unbelievable. On top of that, besides being able to fight alone against a large number of enemies, the mercenary still managed to help his partner Johnny, who was in danger before a gigantic monster. Quickly, he cut the giant in half and saved the young fighter. However, he told his comrade to leave the thanks for later. After all, the enemy hordes kept gathering like an anthill, and it seemed that this battle would never end. If things continued as they were, the two assumed that Svel's infantry would soon be completely wiped out. In a short time, the enemy forces gathered even more, making the front line unbearable. Johnny and Gantz soon became cornered and ready to be killed, until the wise King Megriz summoned the Guardian of Svel, Levia. With a rain of ice spears of absurd precision, the Guardian eliminated a large part of the monsters in a single attack, without a single ally being harmed in the process. From that moment on, the King of Svel announced that he would take care of the city's protection alongside the water giant, and upon hearing that, the army celebrated the arrival of their saviors. The monster horde tried to flee, but the Guardian was so terrifyingly fast that he glided above the monstrous troops and crushed whoever he pleased, causing true chaos in the enemy lines. Watching the war from the top of a mountain beside her master, Dina commented that there might be no room for Lufa's to intervene after Levia's arrival. First of all, Lufa's was relieved that Gantz was fine and even believed that Levia might be able to defeat Ares, mainly because the ram was of the fire element, and also because the water guardian had Megriz by his side. Speaking of which, the Celestial looked at his attributes, even though she didn't know if her appraisal skill would work, since the two were of the same level. However, that was when the surprise came. The elf had fallen to level 500. According to the status panel, he carried the mark of the defeated. With that, Dina discovered that the rumor about the 7 heroes was true. After being defeated by the Demon King, they were all cursed, causing their powers to be cut in half. In other words, Megrez wouldn't have enough strength to create another guardian of that level. If Levia falls, Svel falls. And speaking of which, the greatest challenge of the Water Guardian's life had just arrived: the almighty Ares, whose colossal size terrified all the soldiers who had been celebrating the Protector's arrival moments earlier. Without delay, Levia and Ares clashed in a deadly battle. Even though fire had a clear disadvantage against water, the ram was so powerful that his strength made up for that weakness to some extent. In any case, all Megrez could hope for now was that water would prevail in the end. Otherwise, everything would be lost, since Levia was Svel's last bastion. At one point, Ares fired a fireball that the soldiers believed had missed the target, but on the contrary, the victim the ram wanted was protected inside the castle. The wise king, with his master in danger of being set on fire, the Water Guardian rushed to use his own body as a shield and absorb the flames with his main element. Taking advantage of the enemy's unbalance, Megrez ordered a tidal wave, and Levia transformed his body into a tsunami to finish off the fire ram once and for all. However, in a maneuver that Svel's warriors could hardly believe, given the creature's bulk, Ares managed to use his own element as a propulsive force to leap high enough to escape the massive wave. In the same, the ram managed to gain space to attack Megrez directly, who seems to be its main target despite Levia's presence. The elf protects himself as best as he can with a magic shield. But soon the fire monster doubles its power with an ability called Mesarthim, which, according to Megrez, is an unfortunate forgotten left by Lufas. The situation was getting worse by the second, and the tendency was that the king would succumb under such pressure. However, Levia manages to return to the battle just in time to give the enemy a tight embrace. Not only was her strength overwhelming, but the water that formed her body was also the element that severely weakened Ares. From that moment on, the forces of Svel, who could only cheer for victory, watched that embrace with hope that the battle was about to be won. From the top of the mountain, Dina asks what Lufas thinks, and she says that if it depended only on the fight, Levia would win. However, the HP of the Water Guardian is being reduced, weakening him little by little. So even if he won that battle, he would certainly lose the war for having no remaining strength. Speaking of which, Lufas believes that Ares never intended to win this fight from the beginning. In fact, he's only pretending that this is his final attack while weakening the Guardian. All those monsters that came along were just bait to make Svel think this was the final all-out battle. The ram probably understood that he wouldn't defeat Levia with a single strike and is already planning a retreat when the ideal moment comes. Since they can't leave the country unprotected, Megrez and Levia would never abandon Svel to chase the enemy. In the end, Mafahel somewhat laments that Ares has become so cunning, but the truth is that he was trained for a long time by the conqueror of Black Wings herself, which means there's definitely her hand in all this. Suddenly, Ares breaks free from Levia's embrace with lava so hot that it was capable of evaporating the water. At that moment, Lufas feels that it's time to take action before the Guardian grows even weaker. So she grabs Dina by the arm and drags the poor girl through the sky until they reach the giant ram. The Celestial doesn't feel good about attacking a loyal subordinate who's only doing all this for her. But still, something needs to be done. Therefore, as if she were Monica using Sansao, Lufas uses Dina to deliver a hammer-like blow to the monster, sending it flying far away and making its gigantic body crash through a series of mountains with the force of that throw. After that, Svel's soldiers stood with their mouths open down to their chests. While everyone wondered who this person was, Lufas descended to the wise king to announce her arrival. Even though she didn't say her name, the elf recognized that voice, that way of speaking, although he still didn't fully believe that this person was who he thought she was. After all, it was impossible. Either way, Lufas assures him that she'll take care of Ares, so she leaves Dina behind and gets ready to depart. Before that, Megrez informs her that someone used Ares' desire for revenge to manipulate certain things, meaning that the Black Wing should be careful. Even though she thinks she doesn't need any advice, the Celestial thanks him for the warning in the name of their old friendship. Next, Lufas Mafahel goes to meet her old companion. First of all, she's surprised to hear the ram's voice asking, "Who dares to challenge me?" Even when she left this world, the Conqueror had never heard her friend communicating that way. Now, answering his question, she releases a vast and powerful aura around her body to prove who she really is. Feeling that overwhelming pressure, Ares immediately imagines who this woman must be. Yet he can't completely believe it after all. Mafahel is dead, Seeing the animal's visible shock, the conqueror demands that he test for himself whether she's telling the truth, and the only way to do that is through a duel between them. Thus, Ares doesn't back down. On the contrary, he transforms his body in such a way that, for the first time since returning to this world, Luphas feels she'll face a challenge worthy of her power, and that sensation brings a smile of satisfaction to the Black Wing. Without delay, Ares charges at his supposed master, but she easily stops his attack with just one hand. In her opinion, the ram is still spoiled even after 200 years, but that's fine. His mother can give him some affection to comfort her little boy. In this case, the affection in question was a throw that sent the ram flying upward, followed by a punch to the back, then a hit to the chin, and finally, a flying kick to the stomach that buried his head violently into the ground. After recovering, Ares is consumed by rage, which makes his body reach an extremely high level of power, his final move, fueled by the strength of hatred. With that, the next clash between him and Maphael grows to such proportions that the collision could be seen as a sun born from the impact, glowing purple like a bruise. The explosion that followed looked like the result of an atomic bomb, a macabre spectacle that Svel's warriors watched with despair written all over their faces. Despite the ugliness of the explosion, in the end, Luphas simply stopped Ares's attack with her hand, practically patting his snout as if she were taming a puppy with affection. According to the Black Wing, her servant had always been a crybaby, but it's true that he'd become much stronger. Having said that, the conqueror flicks her finger, sending the ram flying into the nearest mountain, and then asks if he believes now that she's really his master. As an answer, Ares gives up the fight and takes his human form, breaking down in tears without fear of showing emotion. He embraces the woman who is practically his mother in this world and asks for forgiveness for the way he acted. Showing empathy, Luphas tells the boy to stop crying until he finally calms down. When everything seems calmer, Dina appears through teleportation. Luphas checks the status of the rainbow ram and notices that his level is the same as in the game, but his abilities are even better than the last time his master saw him, which shows that Ares really worked hard during those 200 years that passed. With that in mind, the Celestial reveals that she's on a journey to recover the 12 celestial stars, and fortunately, she's already found the first one. That said, Luphas spreads her wings in the same way she did when she met Ares. Immediately, the rainbow ram feels the same sensation as before, and his eyes begin to shine. The master says she won't accept a no for an answer, but that isn't even necessary. The boy is already hypnotized by the beauty and grandeur of the conqueror of Black Wings. He's happy to have been the first one to be found again and gives Maphael a hug, promising to do his best. Thus, Ares is officially part of the group. Seeing Dina clapping her hands, the ram thanks the stranger for the recognition. Naturally, this leaves the assistant completely beside herself. After all, she's been at the Maphael Tower from the very beginning, standing right next to the Empress the whole time. In disbelief, she asks the fire beast to make a little effort to remember her. And then Ares recalls she was that NPC-like girl who practically blended into the scenery. Those words shake Dina's emotional core in an inexplicable way, which forces Luphas to ask for a bit more kindness when speaking about the girl, since she's helped so much ever since her master came back to life. Meanwhile, in the tower of a dark castle, a man shows a macabre smile. Returning to Luphas, she asks why Ares wanted to invade Svel, and he answers, full of anger, that he cannot forgive the humans who betrayed his master. Maphael's dream had always been to create a world where no one had to fear demons. But humanity trampled on that ideal and ruined everything, when everything would have been much better if the conqueror were still alive. Deep down, Ares cannot stand that only those war criminals remain worshipped now as heroes. Crying, the celestial star says he owes much to his master, since he would not even be alive if he had not met her. Luphas understands from this answer that Ares's true motivation was the loyalty he still feels, so she gently strokes the boy's head to calm him down a little. Even so, she remembers what Megris said about someone having used Ares to manipulate certain things, and that makes her ask if there is nothing else behind the attack on Svel. Seeing the ram hesitate, the Black Wing makes it clear that she does not mean to offend him, but that she also does not desire revenge, although she was happy that Ares showed the will to avenge her. In fact, that is exactly why she wants to go after the one who used that feeling. But for that to happen, she needs Ares to tell her who that scoundrel is. Thus, Ares begins to tell the story. Meanwhile, at Mount Jael, a demon called Mars of Fire laughed in satisfaction, as he confirmed that Levia was now much weaker. He could finally bring down Svel with his powerful army made up of monsters level 80 and above. Without wasting time, Mars ordered his horde to invade the water country and carry out a merciless massacre. With victory, he hoped to erase yet another hero who had dared to challenge his demonic majesty. He had spent many years provoking Ares' feeling of revenge, and now it had all been worth it, for the power of one of the 12 celestial stars was decisive in weakening Svel's guardian. However, while the demon was already celebrating victory too early, a huge explosion occurred at Mount Jail, opening a colossal crater that destroyed his entire army in the blink of an eye. In disbelief, Mars looked down and saw Ares standing next to someone he didn't recognize, but judging by the power, he assumed it was one of the 7 heroes. To be sure, he leaped swiftly toward the pair, seeing the creature up close. With bluish skin and peculiar eyes, Mars immediately realized it was a demon. Mars asked where Ares' hatred for humans had gone, reminding him that the ram had wanted to bring down Svel to avenge his master. The boy replied that he still had not forgiven humanity and hated the 7 heroes so much that he wished them all dead. However, he hated even more the thought that, after completing his revenge, the one Ares would truly be helping would not be his master, but the demons. Because of that, the Rainbow Ram vowed to stop Mars. Mars, in turn, knew this day would come. He said he could have destroyed Svel whenever he wanted but chose to hold back. In truth, Ares was just a card up his sleeve, a tool he had used to weaken Levia, and now he was useless. Since Ares dared to stand against the demons, the evil commander drew his 2 daggers to end the celestial star right there. Immediately, Luphas told Ares to stay back, since he had not yet recovered from the previous battle. With the Black Wing taking the lead in the duel, Mars admitted he did not know there was someone so strong in this era, but regardless, he guaranteed that such audacity to defy the demons would be her end. To prove his point, the monster began to prepare the special technique of Mars, the frozen fire demon of the 7 stars, the dream blades of infernal flame and binding ice. In his right hand, the demon conjured infernal fire, while his left hand held binding ice. With those combined abilities, Mars could turn any enemy to dust. Saying that, he leaped toward Luphas and made an impressive display of speed and strength. As he performed his spectacle, he promised he would be the reaper of the conqueror's life, and that, when he finally killed her, she would thank him for freeing her from the inevitable suffering his power would bring. After 5 minutes of boasting about how he would win, the demon finally attacked and was met with a punch straight to the face. As he was thrown backward by the impact, Mars noticed the woman's hood fall. Seeing those black wings and golden hair, he could hardly believe it was her. In any case, Mafal's punch was so strong it sent him flying straight to the stars. He would not be coming back anytime soon, if he survived at all. On the other hand, calm as ever, Luphas found it absurd that the mastermind behind the entire scheme was such a weakling. Then she asked what that 7 stars thing the monster mentioned was about. Ares revealed that Mars of Fire was one of the 7 stars. But before he could finish telling the story, Dina appeared via teleportation, insisting she should be the one to explain it. In truth, the 7 stars are the group of generals commanding the demonic forces, formed 80 years ago. Currently, aside from the king and his children, they are the strongest demons in existence. Luphas found that ridiculous, since that guy was at most level 300. Dina explained that the quality of demons had dropped indeed. Humanity lost to the Demon King. But the demons also lost many powerful soldiers in the war. In fact, the world would already have ended if that had not happened. If that was the case, Luphas reflected, then the Demon King and the 12 celestial stars were the only ones capable of facing her. Changing the subject, Ares noticed that his master had not killed any of the monsters from Mars's army. She explained that those creatures had only been used. Ares argued that they might attack humans if left loose, so the Black Wing used her capture magic to lift the monsters and make them obey her will. Dina asked if she really intended to walk around with those big creatures. But Luphas ordered all units to return to their lairs and not attack humans without reason. When the army dispersed, Ares was impressed by his master's ability to resolve the situation without violence. The next day, the trio returns to Svel. Luphas tells Megrez that she defeated Ares and Mars, which impresses the elf, who wishes to talk with the conqueror in a more private place. Hearing this, Luphas remembers the player who controlled Megrez in the game. The guy was one of the best and helped a lot to keep the world active. They always hunted together and had fun saying silly things. However, from what it seems, this elf really developed his own personality and is no longer controlled by a player. In the next scene, on the way to the meeting with the conqueror, Megrez meets some members of the nobility who show a false concern about the return of the wise king. After getting rid of those men, the elf says that those people are the authorities who should protect the people, but they only think about flattering the king to guarantee their own safety. Then, he takes the black-winged one to his office and asks her to reveal her face. When she does it, he confirms once and for all that he is indeed in front of none other than Lufa's Mafahel. In turn, when she saw the terrified expression on the elf's face, the black-winged one also confirmed that he is not a player, in other words, not the old friend she had in the game. Megrez argues that people change, and that they can become stronger or weaker in 200 years. In his case, the king did not grow weaker only physically, but mentally as well. He also asks why Lufa's Mafahel returned to this world if it was just to laugh at the decay of civilization. However, she says it was just a coincidence, since a group tried to summon a hero and ended up summoning her instead. Deep down, Lufa doesn't understand what happened to this Megrez, since he seems much more defeated than she remembered in the game. Wondering the reason, she mentions that she was in the library of Svel and found several books criticizing the 7 heroes, then accuses Megrez himself of having placed them there as a sick way to seek reproach and contempt instead of praise and respect, probably because he feels guilty for having defeated Mafahel and allowed the advance of the demon army. That said, even though Megrez didn't answer, his sad expression revealed everything. After sighing at the unspoken truth, Lufa insists that the wise king must be proud for having defeated such a powerful enemy in that war against Mars, and that this pride should lead him to the right path. At least, that was the Megrez she knew. Still shaken, Megrez asks if Lufa doesn't hate them, since she was about to reach her goal at that time. But their betrayal stopped her from getting there. Lufa answers that she feels no hatred toward them. Inside, she reflects that she doesn't feel anything because it was something that happened in the game and not in real life, which makes her think about a more real answer, what Lufa's Mafahel would truly say. However, she decides to hold back and answer according to who she really is. Then, she says that if Megrez and the others opposed her because they were dissatisfied, it means she wasn't good enough. Therefore, she has no reason to hate any of them. Megrez refuses to accept being forgiven and almost complains about the black-winged one's attitude. But the wind from the window makes him stop to think. Then, Lufa asks him to stop blaming himself, especially because he is a hero to the people of this country and should be proud of it, just as he was 200 years ago. This statement makes Megrez remember a moment he lived alongside Lufa's Mafahel in a tavern many years ago. In that moment of relaxation, he complained that elves were too reclusive, and that they should go out and see how big the world is instead of staying locked away in a forest. In truth, Megrez wanted to create a very big city, maybe a metropolis, a place where elves could live with their heads held high. Playfully, Lufa thought his dream was too small, since hers was to conquer the entire world and create a utopia where no one would fear demons. Alioth, the human who completed the trio at the table, laughed at the Celestial's plans and even promised to eat noodles with his nose if she managed to do that. In that case, the black-winged one promised she herself would shove the noodles up his nose if her dream came true. The threat, of course, was just a joke between the 3 of them, who loved and respected each other above all. With that sweet memory running through his mind, Megrez raises his head and sees in front of him the same Lufa's Mafahel as always, then says that the advice she gave was great. After that, Lufa heals Levia, which Megrez thanks immensely, since his current condition doesn't allow him to recover the Guardian's full HP. Once that's done, the Celestial asks the king to forgive Ares, although the boy makes it clear that he never apologized after all. They were the ones who betrayed their master in the first place. Ignoring the boy's stubbornness, the elf asks what the Conqueror will do now, and she reveals that she wants to gather the 12 celestial stars. Dina assumes that her master will go to the mausoleum of the Black Wings after that, but Lufa herself doesn't know what that is. In fact, by the name, she thinks it even sounds like her tomb. Dina confirms that not only does it sound like it, but it really is. 200 years ago, the people who worshipped Lufa's Mafahel built the greatest structure in the world, where, on the top floor, the treasures and equipment she used at the time are kept. And one of the 12 celestial stars, Libra, has been guarding that floor since the very first day. Megrez heard that anyone who tries to get close is mercilessly eliminated, since Libra has become a deadly machine. Lufa asks if there's a reason for someone to want to plunder the tomb to the point of facing Libra. And the wise king explains that not only people and monsters have declined over these 200 years, but weapons and equipment too. The legendary weapons were lost in the fight against the Demon King, and the ones that remain are inside the tomb of the black-winged conqueror. In short, facing Libra is a small price to pay for humanity, which is close to extinction. Speaking of which, Megrez asks Lufas that, after recovering Libra, she leaves some equipment in the mausoleum, even if it's only the ones she won't use. After promising to do something like that, the Celestial summons her companions to find Libra. However, imagining it would be difficult to travel unnoticed with those huge wings, the elf casts a spell that changes Lufa's Mafahal's appearance, making her look like an ordinary, not so intimidating human. Lufas feels deeply grateful and says goodbye. Before she could leave for good, the wise king interrupts her for a moment to wish her a good trip. Next, the woman approaches Gantz, who shamelessly praises the lady's beauty, seeing that he doesn't recognize her because she's always wearing that hood. She reveals that she is Lufas, and that she only came to thank him for everything and say goodbye. Gantz bids farewell to the three girls, and then Mafahel corrects him, saying that Ares is actually a boy, which leaves the mercenary quite embarrassed as he tries to fix his mistake. After letting out a laugh, the black-winged one departs on her journey. Before that, Gantz almost asks if she isn't Lufa's Mafahel, but gives up before finishing the sentence and wishes her good luck. Finally, with the trio already far from Svel's entrance, Dina praises Gantz's camaraderie, while Mafahel announces that it's time to go after the balanced Libra. Meanwhile, after landing from his forced flight and realizing who that person really was, Mars feels the despair of having an enemy like Lufa's back again. Suddenly, a woman approaches the demon and says that when the scene ends, the actors must leave the stage. In other words, if Mars's part is over, then he should get off. That's the rule of the game. Saying this, and referring to the demon as a wretched puppet, the woman snaps her fingers and makes Mars disappear. Meanwhile, Lufas's group decided it was time to head to the mausoleum of the Black Wings, a very long journey ahead. Since it was so far away, Dina suggested that her master should create a golem to carry the trio. Lufas reminded her that the assistant had teleportation magic, and that she herself hadn't wanted to use a carriage to go to Svel. Dina explained that teleportation was usually for one person only, and that to carry someone else, that person had to be completely willing or unconscious. If there was even a hint of rejection toward the caster, she'd rather not even say what could happen. Since that was the case, Lufas didn't mind going on foot, but Dina complained that not everyone had the conqueror's endurance to walk like a mule. Therefore, so they wouldn't have to sleep in the cold and deal with all that, the boss could at least create a golem that already came with rooms and bathrooms. Inside, Mafahel wondered what kind of golem this woman even wanted, while Ares looked at her with a pleading face, hoping to get what he wanted. So, the black-winged one gathered a pile of wood and rocks, alchemized them, and simply formed a trailer right before everyone's eyes. Using the remaining materials, she also made furniture to fill the vehicle. However, in the end, they were still missing mattresses, and Dina thought it would be great if they had some. In that case, Lufas looked around for the materials she'd need to alchemize such an item. After a brief search, her eyes landed on Ares, and she decided to use the poor guy as a scapegoat to create the mattresses. Feeling violated, the ram lamented that he could no longer become a pure bride, while Mafahel reminded him that he was a man. Once everything was ready, Dina and Ares thought it would be nice to give the golem a name something elegant, but not arrogant. Remembering his previous world, Mafahel imagined a commercial in his head where the trailer was called, for some reason, Tanaka, complete with one of those cliché car ad slogans like, anytime, anywhere. In the end, the trailer really did get that name, but it wasn't just any trailer, it was actually a golem that responded to its master's commands. This time, she ordered it to head to the mausoleum of the Black Wings. Hours later, Ares started feeling sleepy, so Lufas asked Tanaka to park somewhere suitable. Once it stopped, Dina got out and caught a scent in the middle of the forest. She didn't waste any time and went after the smell. When she arrived, she came across hot springs and celebrated like crazy. Lufas asked if she didn't already have the bathtub she'd built inside the trailer. But according to the human, one thing is one thing, and another thing is another thing. With that, she dragged Ares to get in the spring, but the ram got embarrassed and made up an excuse to stay behind. As for Lufas, she looked down at her own body and, remembering she was a male player, couldn't help wondering how this was going to turn out. Either way, with or without company, Dina went in first and entered the spring. Amazed by the feeling, she told her master that the water was deep enough to reach her shoulders. The conqueror looked at her body again but stayed still. Dina snapped her out of it, and she finally took off her clothes, keeping only a towel. Before she went in, Dina asked to tie her master's hair, since if a long strand of hair fell and floated on the water, it gave the impression of being dirty. As she said that, the girl started to rise from the water to do it. But even though Lufas was now a woman, she didn't think it was right to look at Dina naked, so she told her she'd go instead. So, with the two of them in the spring, while Dina tied the black winged one's hair, she asked if it was true that the winged celestials usually didn't bathe because they shed their feathers too quickly, which Mafael confirmed. Truth be told, as the two of them enjoyed the hot spring, Lufas couldn't ignore the fact that Dina was naked beside her. It reminded her that she used to be a pervert back on Earth. However, thinking about it now, the Conqueror couldn't feel anything like that. It was as if she had dried up inside. In the middle of that reflection, Dina called her master's attention to show her some adaptive frogs, a rare species where the green ones were male and the pink ones female. Out of nowhere, the three males started fighting, and the winner went after the female. According to Dina, when there's an extra male, one of them changes sex and joins the remaining male, which indeed happened, as one of the green amphibians turned pink to mate with the other. Hearing that, just imagining a buff bald man in front of her made Lufas Mafael feel a deep disgust, and she quickly forced that thought out of her head. With her mind fried from that madness, the black-winged one asked to leave the spring. When the two returned to Tanaka, Dina told Aries that he could go now. The boy tied his hair with a twig he found on the ground and headed to the spring. Watching the scene, Lufas couldn't help noticing how feminine the kid looked. At dawn, the group reached the mausoleum of the Black Wings. As they got close to the entrance, Mafael couldn't help commenting on how absurdly large the thing was. Speaking of which, she asked why there was a village surrounding her tomb. Dina explained that many adventurers and bounty hunters had come to conquer the tomb, and after them came merchants wanting to profit from the movement. Things kept snowballing until a village formed. Lufas found it curious that her tomb had become a tourist attraction, and Dina admitted that the mausoleum of someone world famous, known for their great deeds, usually ended up like that. Hearing that, Aries scowled and promised his master that he would drive out all those opportunists. It was unforgivable, he said, that they had come to plunder the grave of the great Lufas Mafael. However, the Celestial told the ram to calm down. It wasn't smart to start a fight out of nowhere, especially since she was alive and well, so technically, that wasn't even her tomb anymore. Seeing how easily the kid got fired up about anything related to her, Mafael couldn't help wondering if all 12 Celestials were like that, because if they were, things were going to get ugly. Finally, the three go to the door of the mausoleum and notice that the adventurers are not exploring the tomb, so they decide to ask why. A group of warriors explains that about 2 months ago, the Special Investigation Squad entered the tomb, but today they still haven't sent the usual daily message. Yesterday they were almost on the highest floor, close to conquering the place, but something went wrong. Therefore, Lufas calls her allies to go in, imagining that Libra is on the top floor. She needs to be rescued as soon as possible to prevent more victims. Before that, the group of adventurers they were talking to asks if they are really going to enter, since the Special Investigation Squad is made up of 50 skilled government agents, and if even they are having trouble, imagine the three of them. Mafael thanks them for the concern but insists there's nothing to fear, then continues walking toward the interior of the mausoleum. Once inside, Aries lights a flame in his hand that serves as a torch to guide his allies through the darkness. The vast and empty corridors were so silent that it felt as if something could happen at any moment, which indeed happens without delay. At a certain point, a very heavy creature emerges from the shadows, one of the level 150 golems that Lufas Mafael had mass-produced 200 years ago for the final battle against the 7 heroes. Apparently, the ones that survived have been wandering this mausoleum all this time. Mafael doesn't feel any intention from this golem to attack them, so these monsters are still able to tell friends from enemies even after so long, and possibly recognize the Conqueror as their master. That said, the golem slams a punch into the ground that almost catches Dina off guard, throwing the whole speech of the Black Wing down the drain. The girl manages to escape by a hair, and, seeing that the giant keeps focusing on her, she wonders why on earth this is happening, while begging for Lufas's help. In the Celestial's opinion, Dina's presence was so irrelevant that the golem didn't even remember her. Apparently, since there's no choice, Lufas gets ready to help the girl, but an adventurer rushes ahead with his sword and intervenes first, blocking the golem with his blade. In the end, it was the same group of warriors with whom Lufas had spoken at the entrance of the mausoleum, now introducing themselves as Hawk's Eye. The rogue attacks with his 2 daggers, then the brute hits the golem with his huge 2-handed axe, followed by a sequence of arrows from the archer. When all attacks fail miserably, Luffy even acknowledges their good teamwork. But analyzing the level of these adventurers, which ranges between 35 and 38, it's clear they won't bring this golem down no matter what. And on top of that, they'll certainly die in the first blow. Because of that, she asks Ares to help those people. So the ram fires a fireball conjured in his hand, then throws a punch that sends the monster flying and ends the fight in the blink of an eye. The members of Hawkeye stare at the scene with their jaws dropped, while the leader of the group makes a point of approaching to say how incredible that was and to ask how that girl is capable of doing something like that. Luffy steps in to calm the adventure down, since Ares is visibly annoyed by the man's playful behavior, and clarifies that Ares is a boy, not a girl. The man swore he was a girl, so the archer smacks the leader on the head to show that he's being inappropriate. Anyway, the four adventurers thank their companions for the help, laughing that they went to save others but ended up having to be saved themselves. Because of that, they point out that Luffy's Mafahal is a good person, and she finds it curious that they used those words. The leader of Hawkeye introduces himself as Jean, from the warrior class. The short guy behind him says his name is Nick, an agile warrior. The big guy is Richard, a shielded warrior. And lastly, Shu is the archer of the group. Luffy keeps that to herself, but thinks this group is extremely unbalanced because most of them are frontliners. Anyway, she says her name is Sufel, from the ranger class. Dina introduces herself as another ranger and free merchant, while Ares, not knowing what to say, repeats that he's also a free merchant and ranger, whatever that means. Ironically, Jean comments that their group is pretty unbalanced and asks if they'll be fine. Outraged by that comment, Mafahel can't believe these fools are questioning that, but keeps calm to clarify that her team members are of the highest level. Still, Jean isn't sure if a group focused only on strength can go far in this dungeon. And Luffy gets even angrier at the man's audacity. When the warrior offers his team to act as bodyguards for them, the Black Wing is ready to tell him off. But for some reason, Dina steps forward and accepts the offer. Anyway, when the quartet goes ahead, Dina asks why her master is acting like that, since now they can just let the men break themselves apart while they can take it easy until they reach Libra. Knowing it won't go that way and that she'll have to save those adventurers sooner or later, Mafahel points out how frightening her assistant's mind can be sometimes. Meanwhile, in another part of the enormous mausoleum, another group of adventurers was advancing with difficulty due to exhaustion and injuries. However, as a reward, they were close to reaching the final destination, finally able to get the rare weapons and make sure their companions' deaths weren't in vain. Without delay, they reached the last floor, and then a young girl with a robotic appearance and voice identifies the entry of intruders and recommends that they leave the place within 10 seconds, because if they don't obey or show hostile behavior, they will be punished with violence. The adventurers recognize Libra, the balance, and announce that they did not come to fight, but to collect the weapons of the Black-Winged Conqueror, which are necessary to save humanity from the demon's attack. Upon hearing this, since the invaders' objective had been determined, Libra stops the countdown, which relieves the adventurers. However, instead of sparing them, the robot begins to recognize the intruders as external enemies after its master's treasure, and soon executes the Brachium program, surrounding the men with an extremely vast power. In the next moment, we see the Hawkeye group promoting themselves in a comical way, almost like the Power Rangers, before attacking the enemy inside the dungeon and immediately getting completely beaten up. Tired of that nonsense, Luffy's Mafahel steps forward and orders the golem to deactivate for now. Not understanding a thing, the Hawkeye party attacks the creature again, but they can't deal any significant damage to it. Speaking as if she were talking to children, Luffy makes up an excuse, saying that this monster doesn't seem to want to fight anymore, so it would be best to leave it alone. However, the golem falls backward, which starts to convince that group of adventurers that they're strong enough to face the dangers that once tormented the Special Investigation Squad. After that, everyone reaches the 106th floor, meaning there's not much left until the top. Ares gets anxious because they'll soon meet Libra, while Luffy's Mafahel orders everyone to step back a few paces. Nobody understands why, until a loud crash echoes through the floor, followed by the appearance of a colossal golem emitting a terrifying roar. Luffy thinks about how much effort the Special Investigation Squad must have put in to reach this part of the mausoleum, and how some of them probably sacrificed themselves so that others could move forward. When she realizes that the golem is level 600, she notices that since the level difference between them isn't double, some of its attributes remain hidden, meaning this golem doesn't belong to the Conqueror. For that reason, she steps forward to fight. Since she can't control this monster from a distance and doesn't want to put her companions' lives at risk, even though they don't understand her reckless courage, the members of Hawkeye rush in to stop a disaster. But Dina politely asks them not to advance, arguing that Lufa's Mafahel must have a plan. Facing her opponent, the black-winged woman asks the Gate Guardian if he knows who she is. After a few seconds of tense silence, the golem replies by identifying Mafahel as an intruder, then immediately attacks with a brutal punch. The Hawkeye group is sure she's done for, but she quickly dodges the blow and cuts the golem in half with a simple counterattack, leaving the other adventurers completely terrified. Curiously, after being defeated, the golem activates a voice program recognizing the return of its master, Lufa's Mafahel. Moved by that, Lufa thanks the creature for its loyalty and praises the work it has done all this time. When the golem dies, the Conqueror orders Hawkeye to stay there, realizing that this woman is much stronger than they imagined. They understand that they should obey, but still find it crazy for Lufa to go alone. She answers that only her strength is enough to face Libra's Brachium, since that thing could kill each of her companions 30 times over and still have power left. Faced with such impressive revelations, Jean asks who Asfalu really is, because not only has she done everything she's done so far, but she also talks about Libra as if she knows her. The former ruler of the world refuses to answer and keeps walking. Dina points out that she and Ares wouldn't stand a chance against a Brachium anyway, so they'll just stay quiet there. On the way to the second member of the 12 Celestials, the player can't understand how a mere golem managed to shake his mind so much, especially because he isn't Lufa's Mafanan and shouldn't have a reason to feel that sadness. Either way, shaken or not, Lufa finds herself before the final hall of the Black-Winged Mausoleum, where Libra identifies her as an intruder and orders her to leave within 10 seconds. When she starts counting down, the Conqueror removes her cloak and reveals her true identity. Libra runs an analysis and concludes there's a 99.9% chance it really is Lufa's, and less than a 1% chance of surviving a battle at that level. Since she hasn't reached this part in 200 years, the poor thing completely bugs out and doesn't know how to act in this situation. And the overheating of her robotic parts makes her once again threaten her master's safety. Even so, afraid that the poor thing might completely break down, Lufa approaches her, and the robot reacts by activating a program that replaces the current room with a completely different environment, one that gives her a considerable advantage in battle. Then, after initiating her offensive protocol, she states with certainty that she will eliminate the threat with violence. With a booster jet attached to her back and 2 automatic firearms, Lufa's servant hides many other deadly secrets within her robotic body. Using her ability to fly and keep her distance in that much larger space, the metallic creature, when she fails to hit Lufa with her handguns, spins around and launches a series of missiles from under her skirt, causing a massive explosion over her supposed enemy. Still, that was far from all her tricks. Noticing that her target was still alive, Libra initiates an extremely hostile protocol. As her body spins wildly, the battlefield turns into greater chaos every second, with bullets, gunfire, and explosives flying from every part of the Treasure Guardian's body. Even so, with great skill, Lufa interrupts the robot's frenzy with a sharp counterattack, destroying one of the enemy's automatic weapons and damaging the other by deflecting the projectiles coming her way. Having been weakened, Libra deactivates the environmental program and, upon returning to the original final level of the mausoleum, activates her main ability, which makes Lufa certain she's about to take serious damage for the first time in a long while. And she's right. Libra activates her technique, Brachium, unleashing a hellish heat so intense that Lufa's Mafahel's HP starts to drop at an alarming speed. Still, convinced she won't die, the Black-Winged Conqueror charges through that absolute chaos and forces Libra to deactivate Brachium by getting too close. Vulnerable, Libra responds with a laser shot from her eye. But as soon as Lufa dodges, she strikes back with a close-range attack using a blade built into her arm. With one hand, Lufa deflected her servant's bladed arm, and with the other, she touched Libra and used her total repair ability, regenerating the robot and calming her hostility. Once that was done, the master apologized for taking so long and making her servant wait there all alone, but finally, she had come to get her. Hearing those words, the robot became 100% certain that she was truly facing her master, and so she finally canceled her internal mission to defend the mausoleum. In the end, in an almost human gesture, tired from the battle, she laid her head on Lufa's Mafahel's chest, who gave a faint, satisfied smile. Now, after completing her mission, Lufa's perhaps had an even harder one ahead, explaining to those guys how she managed to defeat Libra, the balance, so quickly. So, she went down to the floor where Dina, Ares, and the members of Hawkeye were waiting, but to her surprise, the adventurers were acting quite strangely. Dina explained that she had used a hypnosis technique to make those guys forget that they had ever met Lufa's and her subordinates. When they were awakened from that drowsy state, they would believe that they themselves had conquered the mausoleum of the Black Wings. Finally, the hypnosis would make them think Libra had already been destroyed when they reached the final level. Lufa's asked if her assistant had let those guys come with the intention of doing this to them, and Dina admitted she had after all. That's what should be done with dead weight. Lufa's thanked the heavens that Dina wasn't her enemy, and Dina replied that she would even turn into the devil himself to protect her beloved master. With that settled, the group climbed to the top floor and came upon an incredible amount of treasure. The moment she saw that sight, Lufa's Mafahel began to tremble and sweat for reasons she couldn't quite understand. Dina explained that her master, well, liked shiny and valuable objects a little more than what would be considered normal. Lufa's didn't really believe that at first, but the longer she stayed in the treasure room, the clearer it became that she simply couldn't control herself. She grabbed every piece of gold that gleamed, no matter how useless it was. The goal had been to take only what was important for the group's journey. But Lufa's was acting so impulsively and childishly with those items that Dina herself had to ask her master to sit quietly for a while until everything was sorted out. After Dina and Ares separated everything that was actually useful, only the weapons Lufa's had used in the past remained ones she would no longer use. After that, Dina sent the surviving golems back to the Mafahel Tower using her escape ability, and Lufa's took charge of gathering all the remaining monsters so the assistant could send them home as well. After all that exhausting work, the Conqueror complained once again about the genius who had the idea of building a mausoleum that huge. Then, out of patience, she asked if they could just ignore Jean's group and get out of there already. And Dina patted her chest and assured her everything would be fine. When the group left that place, Hawkeye woke up from their deep sleep with a strange conviction that they were the ones who had conquered the mausoleum of the Black Wings. That extraordinary achievement only strengthened their belief that they were truly a powerful team heroes, especially once they returned to the city. Meanwhile, far from that endless dungeon, Libra was restored as much as possible by her allies, looking much cleaner than she had at the top of that crazed pyramid. When Lufa's ordered her to awaken, Libra confirmed that her vision was perfect and that her area scan showed no abnormalities. Lufa's asked if her servant was comfortable with her body, and Libra thanked her for all the care she had received. Checking her servant's attributes, Lufa's confirmed that everything seemed in order. Libra then remarked, as always, that Ares' appearance didn't match his gender, which irritated the boy, while Dina gave a mischievous grin. However, when Libra introduced herself to Dina as if she didn't know her, the assistant lost her temper completely, because once again, she had undeniable proof that absolutely no one had any idea who she was. To lighten the situation, Lufa's explained that Dina had been with them all this time, though she understood that the robot's memory might have been damaged by everything that had happened, as a machine built to protect her master from any possible threat on Earth. Ares couldn't believe he had failed to detect someone so stealthy. She had managed to remain invisible to his eyes all this time. Even more frustrated than the robot, the girl refused to accept that she hadn't been recognized. She leaned in close to Libra's face, hoping to trigger some hidden memory in that old piece of metal. Libra, after another scan, stated that there was no matching record, leaving poor Dina completely crushed. Still, Libra explained that due to 200 years of deterioration, some fragments in her system had been damaged, and Dina's data might be stored within those corrupted fragments. They couldn't be accessed for now, but could be recovered in a few months. Until then, the robot would keep a temporary record of Dina as an advisor. With that, while Dina cried quietly in a corner, Lufa's reflected that Libra had no expression, so it was impossible to tell what she was feeling. Yet, since she had remained steadfast for all these 200 years, she must be fine, and her loyalty was surely intact despite everything. Then, the Master announced that she was on a journey to recover the 12 Celestials, and that Libra was the second. For that, she would need all of her servants' power. Upon hearing that, the Balance once again swore her unchanging loyalty to her master, promising to serve Lufa's Mafahel until the very end. From that promise onward, Libra's Brachium, the Balance, officially joined Lufa's Mafahel's group as the second celestial star in her constellation. Speaking of which, Lufa's asked if she knew anything about the other 10. But since she had been defending the mausoleum all this time, Libra couldn't say for sure about any of them. In turn, always much more useful than many might think, Dina reveals that about 200 miles west from there, Parthenos of Virgo lives hidden at the foot of a mountain, in a small village she created herself. Apparently, Parthenos raised a barrier that protects against plants and weaker monsters, and she lives there without any involvement with the outside world. Lufus feels relieved that one of her creations took such an incredible initiative and isn't acting crazy like the first two. So Dina adds that this mountain is Lufus's homeland, where Virgo expelled the other winged celestials and turned the region into an uninhabited sanctuary for her exclusive use. Upon hearing that, Maphael takes back everything he said and only hopes that things stays quiet until they get there. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.